A judge insults Pam Bondi in open court minutes. Later, she has him in handcuffs. You won't believe what happened next. Pam Bondi was no stranger to pressure. As a seasoned prosecutor, she had faced some of the toughest legal battles in the country. But today felt different. As she stepped into the grand courtroom of Judge Howard Gates, she sensed an unusual tension in the air. Judge Gates was infamous for his sharp tongue and unpredictable rulings, and this case was far from ordinary. The trial in question was a high-profile government ethics case, one that had the potential to shake up more than just a few careers. The defendant, a wealthy developer with deep political ties, stood accused of misusing state funds for his private projects. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and Pam had come prepared. What she hadn't anticipated, however, was the open hostility coming from the bench. As she approached the plaintiff's table, Judge Gates barely glanced up. Instead, he slowly flipped through a file, letting the courtroom sit in silence. It wasn't the routine kind of silence that came with legal proceedings. This was deliberate, a power move meant to unsettle her. Finally, without looking up, he spoke. "Miss Bondi, I assume you've prepared something of substance today, or should we just skip ahead to the part where you waste my time?" His tone dripped with condescension. A few chuckles rippled through the back of the courtroom, mostly from the defendant's legal team. Pam remained composed. She had faced worse. "Your Honor, I believe the evidence will speak for itself," she said evenly. "This case involves the misuse of taxpayer dollars, and my duty is to ensure the facts are presented accurately." Judge Gates leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom. "Taxpayer dollars," he muttered, "because that's never been the foundation of a frivolous case before." Pam's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone measured. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I would hardly call felony corruption charges frivolous." For a brief moment, their eyes met, his cold and calculating, hers unwavering. But before she could continue, he cut her off again. "Mrs. Bondi, spare me the lectures. Just get to the point. I don't have all day for whatever grandstanding you have planned." A murmur spread through the gallery. The courtroom wasn't packed, but those present were alert, sensing something unusual. Judges could be tough, but this was personal. Pam took a slow breath, recalibrating. She knew what he was doing. He wanted to control the tempo, to throw her off balance. But she wasn't about to let him dictate the narrative. She picked up a folder from the table and opened it. "Your Honor, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A. These financial records clearly demonstrate." Judge Gates interrupted, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Do you always insist on drowning people in paperwork, or is this just your way of compensating?" The atmosphere shifted instantly. The defense attorney smirked. A few reporters exchanged glances. Pam, however, remained unfazed. Men like Judge Gates thrived on intimidation. The only way to beat them was to never let them see you rattled. She let a moment of silence pass before responding. Then she clasped her hands together and said, "Your Honor, if you prefer to make this personal, I'm happy to request a recess to address any concerns you may have." Her tone was polite, but the message was clear. She wouldn't be bullied. Judge Gates's lips curled slightly. Was that amusement? Annoyance? It was hard to tell. But he wasn't done. Not yet. "Oh, I don't have concerns, Miss Bondi," he said. "I just know a weak case when I see one." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered under their breath. This was no longer a simple hearing. It was something else entirely. Pam noticed the weight of the room shifting. Eyes flicked between her and the judge. People were paying attention, and that was the last thing Gates wanted. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "then I suppose we should let the evidence do the talking." As she spoke, she caught something in his expression, something more than arrogance. There was something deeper, something personal. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't just about courtroom theatrics. Judge Gates had something to hide. But what he didn't know was that she had something too. Pam continued presenting her case, pointing to the financial documents on the projection screen. The defendant's company received nearly triple the approved budget, and none of it was accounted for in the state records. Judge Gates scoffed. "I hate to interrupt your presentation, really, I do, but I think we've seen enough numbers for one day." Pam glanced at him, then back at the screen. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Your Honor, with all due respect, these numbers are the foundation of the case. Right, he said, waving a dismissive hand. And yet, I fail to see anything that justifies wasting the court's time like this. There it was again, wasting time. He wanted to bury this case before it even got started. A soft rustle behind her caught her attention. The prosecution team exchanged glances. They felt it too. Something wasn't right. Pam took a steadying breath. Your Honor, I'd like to submit a motion to. Denied, Gates said flatly. Pam looked up. I haven't even stated the motion yet. Gates leaned forward. I can already tell you it's going nowhere. Let's be honest, Miss Bondi. This entire case is built on speculation. A little creative accounting, and suddenly you're crying corruption. The defense attorney smirked. He hadn't had to say a word. Judge Gates was doing all the work for him. Pam exhaled slowly. Your Honor, are you refusing to hear my motion before knowing its contents? A beat too long. Then, I'm refusing to indulge the circus act any longer. The room was no longer tense, it was shifting. Even the jurors seemed uncomfortable. One, a woman in a dark blazer, furrowed her brows. The problem with arrogance? It made people pay attention. Pam squared her shoulders. Very well, Your Honor. Let's proceed with the next piece of evidence. She clicked to the next slide. This document, obtained through a subpoena, shows that Miss Bondi. The tone was different this time. She stopped. Judge Gates was no longer leaning back in his chair. His hands were clasped now, his mouth a thin, hard line. Something had changed. Approach the bench. It wasn't a request. Pam hesitated, then set her papers down and walked toward him. The courtroom hushed. When she reached the bench, he lowered his voice. I strongly suggest you reconsider the direction you're taking here, Miss Bondi. She tilted her head slightly. Excuse me. I'm saying, he murmured, that some fights aren't worth having. She let that sit between them. Then, slowly, deliberately, she leaned in just an inch closer. I don't scare easily, Judge Gates. A muscle in his jaw twitched. She turned and walked back to her table, but that moment told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just resistance, this was a cover-up. And now, she knew exactly where to dig.